everyone. I'm Sarah Fieschi, Nutritional Therapy Association of Australia and New Zealand instructor and the founder of Food Spirit Wellness. Today on the vodcast, we are exploring the topic of home education and deschooling with Pavlina McMaster, who is a home education advocate, passionate about supporting and empowering families to educate their children. As coordinator of the Home Education Network, a non-for-profit volunteer-run organisation, she is part of a team that provides guidance, resources and a vibrant community network to families across Australia. Pavlina also serves on the Victorian Home Education Advisory Committee, collaborating with the Victorian Registration and Qualifications Authority and the Department of Education to ensure home educating families are supported and their voices are heard. With more than a decade of experience helping families transition from school to home education, Pavlina regularly runs workshops on topics such as deschooling, school can't, and supporting neurodivergent learners. She is passionate about flexible, child-centered approaches to learning and nurture every child's curiosity, agency, and confidence. Welcome to the podcast, Pavlina.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a wonderful thing that we have you on. Let's kick off with today's discussion about home education and deschooling. With what brought you to home education? What is it like, a little bit about your backstory, how you came to it, and also now that you've been part of the home educating realm for quite some time, why, and in the role that you have within HEN, why you feel more families are beginning to explore this option in current times?
So we started home educating about 13 years ago when my eldest was in prep. So he did actually go to school. We weren't really sure if it would work or not, and it really didn't suit him. And so we did 3 terms of part-time prep and it really wasn't working. So we pulled him out. I don't talk about that time because that's his story to tell. But it was exceptionally stressful. So, lived experience of school can't for sure. It was very traumatic for everybody. And yeah, we pulled him out and started home educating. And then our second child never went to school at all. So we chose to home educate our second child from the start.
And with your experience now and, being very much part of the home education community, why do you feel that there are more families considering home education as an option for educating children?
Yeah, there are lots of reasons. We talk to hundreds of families each year and support lots of people coming into home ed from all around Australia. And there are lots of different reasons why people choose it. And we've run lots of surveys. So we've got good data as well. And they tend to fall into a number of different camps. Some we call kind of philosophical home educators. So they've decided to send their kids, not to send their kids to school. So they've decided to home educate from the start. And that can be for any number of reasons. So those reasons are wide and varied. So some of them will see friends whose kids have struggled at school and they say, well, I don't want my kid to have the same experience. Some of them just want to continue that sort of attachment parenting type of approach, kind of just naturally leads into home education. Some people do it because, it suits their philosophies on life or religion or whatever. Some people really, really just want to give it a go. They're just curious about, doing it differently. And some people have had really, really bad experiences at school themselves, and they don't want their child to have that same experience. And so those are the people who that's the group of people that don't send their child to school and choose home ed from the start. There's others obviously as well. People might want to travel or whatever. Um, but then the other group are the people who have sent their child to school and withdrawn them, and that's the bigger percentage of people. Um, and as a percentage, it's growing. Both groups are growing, but our general feeling is that perhaps that's becoming the more um, dominant kind of way that people come into home education. They're generally all ages, so all the way from prep through to year 10, 11. It depends on which state you're in, what age your child has to be registered until. So, for example, in Victoria, the kids have to be registered till 17. So that's why we see some kids in year 11 being withdrawn. If they're that younger sort of cohort, sort of 16, 17, they will withdraw them and register them. Um, and increasingly, we are seeing more and more kids coming out of school with trauma. That's a really common story. And that the source of that is really variable, though. So some kids come out because they've been bullied. Some kids come out with really poor mental health. A lot of them come out with really poor mental health and really struggling. And then there's also the issue of a lot of kids who are neurodivergent, who are struggling in school because the definition of what's required is becoming narrower and narrower. So, they're being asked to do things that they're not ready for, like reading and writing. The requirements for that have been pushed earlier and earlier in our school system. And so they're really, really struggling to gain these skills that are fundamental to them being able to manage the work that's presented to them later on. And it's not developmentally appropriate for that child. 40 years ago, when I was at school, it was a very different place. It was play based for a lot of it. The expectations, like you were lucky if you could write your name by the end of grade one, so you had prep, you were all play, there was none of this writing business, and there's a lot of kids who are just not ready to do those things in prep. And so they really struggle. And then there's obviously a lot of shame that goes with that, unintentional, but they feel it because they are constantly compared to their peers. When you're sitting there and the kid next to you is told how amazing their handwriting is or how well they're reading and you can't do that, these kids don't live in a bubble, they see those things and they hear those things. So, it sets up a system where, kids' anxiety starts quite early. The expectations on them are unrealistic and they just continue to struggle. And then and I hate this term, but they fall behind, and then the kid has an idea of themselves as a learner, which is not helpful. And also not true because, we value such a narrow set of skills in school. And so these kids that have different skills or whose skills are developing later start to think that they are incapable of certain things that are actually not true. It's just that they're not ready yet.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pavlina. Giving us that breakdown as to, how you're seeing many families, children and their families coming to home education. Um, and I guess it's really interesting because, there is this notion of like what we think and believe of ourselves, we somewhat, bring into, existence as well. So where there is this, you know, this comparison and then, conditioning happening where, children are feeling like they're not up to speed or they're not learning at the same speed as their peers, and that can be quite detrimental in and of itself in the way that they view themselves and continue to
Yeah.
as learners in this world.
And that whole concept of comparing kids to each other is really not helpful because, I'm great at some things and I'm also really not great at other things. And there's some things that I want to be really good at, but I'm not good at yet. And so I'm putting some effort into figuring those out and working on those. And judging and comparing kids is not helpful because at the end of the day, you are where you are. Wherever you go, there you are, right? And if you want to develop your skills in an area, sure, put some effort in it and do that. If you're not quite ready to, or you're just not interested, then find workarounds, find ways to manage things. Like, we can't all be good at everything. And, if you sit there worrying about what you're not good at, you're missing what you are good at.
Yeah, totally, totally. Pavlina, for families contemplating or indeed making the shift away from traditional schooling or mainstream schooling, what does the deschooling process look like and why is it such an important step? It's a word that I've found is being used a lot.
Hmm.
And so can you help us learn a little more about what does deschooling actually mean?
Okay, deschooling's the process of letting go your idea about what education and learning means. So, in our society, the experience that most of us have, 99.9% of us have of education is school. And so we equate school with learning and education. And deschooling is the process of working out what education can look like without school. What does learning really look like? What does it mean to be an educated person if you don't go to school? And what does it mean? Like, how do you get knowledge and how do you become educated and how do you learn if you don't have worksheets and you don't have, structured timetables and you don't have the sage on the stage idea of, someone feeding you information? So, how does that work? And deschooling is also the process of learning to see the learning that is happening all the time. Because as human beings, we are intensely curious creatures. We wouldn't be where we are today as a species without that curiosity. We would still be trying to make fire. And that curiosity just continuously drives human beings to learn. And we see that in toddlers, like people talk about, oh, they don't stop asking questions. Toddlers are always asking questions. It's not toddlers that are asking questions. They're human beings asking questions because that's their natural state. Later on, they go to school, and you cannot have 25 or 30 kids asking one adult all the questions. So they learn to stop asking questions. And we see this all the time. You pull a kid out of school, you wait a bit, it's going to take as long as it takes, and it varies for each child, but they start asking questions again, and that curiosity comes back. And they realize that they are actually very interested in the world around them. But what we forget is that we're not all interested in the same things. Some of us are really intensely interested in trains, and some of us couldn't care less. Some of us are intensely interested in horses, and some of us couldn't care less. So, what you're interested in, it doesn't really matter, but that's the thing that drives your learning. That's the thing that drives your curiosity. And if you're interested in trains or you're interested in horses, you're going to start looking at all the tangential subjects that go with it. And so you start seeing that these kids, this is the deschooling process. You start to go, wow, my kid seems to, be learning so much when all they're interested in inverted commas, is trains. But, trains are made up of lots of things. You know, trains involve geography and maps and history, like different types of engines and motors. And, you can explore the entire world through trains. The same thing with horses. You can look at the evolution of horses. You can look at all the different purposes of horses. Horses have been used in war and in sport. And, then you can look at the psychology of horses and, ethics of even using an animal. So, there's so many subjects to explore. It isn't just horses and it isn't just trains. And so, if you can take a step back and think about what is that kid learning or what is that human being learning, and think about learning and how it happens outside of school. And something I ask people is, so have you learnt anything since leaving school? And people always laugh because, of course I have. Everything I've learnt and I use today has been since I left school. And a lot of the things that I learned in school have been redefined or, have been, I'm looking at through a different lens now. And, let's take Indigenous history as an example, right? What you learnt at school about Indigenous history is nothing to do with what we understand as adults about the Indigenous people of our country. And so, you know, to think, well, that's the only way to learn is actually quite nonsensical because we all learn things after we leave. It might be learning how to knit a jumper, or it might be, learning how to fix your car. And how you do that is going to depend on you as an individual and where your strengths lie. So, do you love to read? Is reading, do you love to go to the library and borrow a book? Do you want to watch a YouTube video? Do you want to go and ask another human being and learn from a mentor that way? You know, so when you're learning how to knit a sleeve onto a jumper, you have choices, right? You can go to the library and get yourself a book. You can watch a YouTube video on it. You can go to your local yarn shop and ask the lady behind the counter to show you how to knit a sleeve onto that jumper. And this is how home ed kids learn too, through mentors, through through the things that bring them joy and through the things that they're really strong in.
Yeah, that's when you talk through all of that, Pavlina, I recall my experience sort of, investigating or researching, what this whole home ed deschooling area could mean for us or how it could be applied in our daily life with our children. And I came to a point where it was like, oh, it was just a bit of like, wow, I never thought of learning in that way, that there could be one activity or a topic, and then there are various learnings that can be experienced from that one activity or topic. Like cooking, for us, it's the cooking. And I remember having some back and forth with you about an activity based learning or that realm of learning. And, just even from cooking in the kitchen, because, hey, we've got to eat, there can be so much different learning that happens. There's the
Yeah,
math in terms of the weights and the quantities, and then there's the reading that happens from recipes, and then there might be, even some drawing, so there's a bit of art of what you created and now you're going to put it in a, create it in a different form. That really blew my mind, because prior to coming to this, what you speak about, I had never thought of education in that way. I'd only thought about it in the way that I'd experienced it. And
yes,
you spoke about that. That for many of us is that same very similar experience. And I was just like, my mind was blown. And I'm like, wow, there's just so much fun to be had in terms of learning. It's quite
absolutely.
amazing, quite a shift
Yeah,
in way of thinking
absolutely.
and perspective.
And I love watching people go through that. So we help people with the learning plans, and I just love it when people will send me a learning plan and it's clearly been they're trying to fit the school mold because they think that's what's required. But in Victoria, that's not what is required. In Victoria, we really encourage people to understand their child and what they love and follow their interests. And, you can be structured within that if you like, but you don't have to be. But it's great to watch people start with this learning plan that's very much not about their child. That learning plan is very curriculum centered. It's very much about these are the subjects that we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to go here for tutoring, blah, 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 blah. And just talking them through that process and saying, well, where's your child in that? What does your child love? Put that in there. And then, some people will go through that process and go through a few iterations and just keep refining. And then I got this gorgeous learning plan. So this was the third time that this mum sent it to me this week. And the first half of it was very, schooly and structured. And then she tacked on at the end a whole other learning plan, which was about the kid and what they loved. I said to her, just get rid of the first 3.5 pages. Trash them. You don't need them. That's not where the learning's going to happen. This kid's going to do all these amazing things. They're going to have an absolutely amazing time exploring all sorts of really fantastic things with so much richness. And you don't need that other stuff. You don't need that structure because they're going to get everything they need from the things that they're loving to do, spending time with grandparents, you know, going to the local park, going to all sorts of museums, you know, going to the local observatory, all sorts of things, you know, that people have planned. You know, just look around in your local environment because there's learning everywhere in everything that you do. And, you know, you can learn budgeting, you know, through getting the kid to help you budget, you know, the local shop, you know, sorry, the weekly shop, you know, and go to the shops and talk about, well, we've got $100 to spend. You know, how are we going to spend it? Are we going to blow it all on this one thing? Or are we going to, you know, here's our list. What can we do? You know, how are we going to spend it? These are life skills. And, you know, they're vital. Like these are skills that we have to send our kids off into the world with.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily getting that from the
No,
mainstream school realm, are they?
not at all.
Um, so, Pavlina, from the discussions I've been having lately, it seems one of the biggest concerns parents have is feeling unqualified to
Hmm.
educate at home. What practical steps or mindset shifts can help parents feel more confident in taking charge of home education for their children?
Yeah. So we actually ran a big survey back in 2022, 2023, when the Senate inquiry into, and I'm going to use inverted commas here because this isn't my language, school refusal, the national trend of school refusal and related matters was on. So the Senate started investigating. We said, well, we need data because they asked us to be witnesses. And so we did a really big survey, got over 600 responses, and we actually asked people who had never home educated their child what were the barriers to home education. And one of the big ones was the parent not feeling qualified. So, you know, you're right to pinpoint that because a lot of people lack confidence. And a lot of people think, well, maybe I can do it. And then when it comes to the crunch, you know, they're really stressed and really anxious about how it's going to go. And, you know, even once they've filled in that paperwork and signed the dotted line, they're still feeling really anxious. And I think a lot of that anxiety comes from not wanting to let your kids down. That's a big one, you know, thinking, am I doing the right thing? Because you're going against the trend, right? You're swimming upstream and everybody else is swimming downstream going, hey, where are you going, man? You can't go that way. That's just wrong. So there's a lot of that. Um, and there's also a lot of professionals in people's lives perhaps telling them that they're doing the wrong thing. There's family a lot of the time or friends because they don't understand. They don't understand the child's needs. They don't understand how this is going to work. It is outside the realm of their experience. A lot of the time with grandparents, they're really worried about, you know, what's going to happen to their grandchild. And, you know, that can all feed into our anxiety as parents. It can be really hard to ignore those voices, especially if we don't know other people on this journey as well. And so, the single biggest factor that we have found that helps parents is to connect in with their home ed community. Whether it's, you know, it can be your local one, but if you don't find your tribe there, then look further afield. And online is perfectly acceptable. There's a lot of online community. And, you know, we've had people who have felt connected to our Victorian community who have been in Queensland more than, you know, more than the people in Queensland that they're surrounded by. And it doesn't matter where you find that. Look for it. Your people are out there. So if you're feeling anxious about it, just surround yourself with other home educators. They will tell you that you are perfectly capable. Nobody has that kid's interests at heart more than you do. No one cares about that kid more than you do. Nobody. Nobody knows that kid more than you do. And that anxiety, maybe sit with that, marinate in it for a bit, and figure out what your actual source of that anxiety is. You know, what are you most worried about? And then take steps to alleviate your anxiety around that. If your anxiety is, how will the kids get along together when currently they fight all the time, blah, 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 right? That's a big one. That's a common one. Oh, but the kids fight all the time. Well, guess what? Kids are going to disagree about things when they're in the same space. But what you find is once you pull them out of school and they're not so stressed, they're not using each other in that equity seeking, right? There's a lot of equity seeking that goes on between siblings when kids feel powerless. And school is a place where a lot of kids feel powerless. They don't have a say in what they do, they don't have a say in all sorts of things. And so they're just seeking equity. And who better to seek equity from than a sibling, right? As soon as they get in the car, they're poking at each other with their pencils, they're arguing over who gets the muesli bar, right? Whatever it is. They're arguing or they're trashing each other's stuff, whatever. And that, as their anxiety comes down and as they start to get more agency in their life and they start to get more say in their life, they actually stop seeking equity all the time from each other because they don't need to, because they have equity, because they have a say, because there is collaboration with parents, the main person that they're hanging around with and who's making decisions with them rather than for them. And so a lot of that improves. If it's anxiety about finances, that's a big one. You know, there's a lot of anxiety around how we're going to make ends meet. The truth is that for a lot of kids with school can't, your job is unstable anyway because you are constantly being called away from work to go and pick that kid up. And so by pulling that kid out and home educating, you've actually made things predictable, right? So there's a period at the start where, your kid needs you more for co-regulation. But then once that co-reg period has passed, you are actually able to plan work into your day. You can, and once you start making connections in the home ed community, your kids can have friends over that you're looking after and they can play and you can do your work and you're there, you know, you're there, you're available. They can come and ask you, but they're hanging out with other kids. They're getting that socialization that is, so feared, right? Like that's the big word. But that's another myth, and that's another source of anxiety for people, We don't lock our kids in the cupboard, They get to come out, they get to go on excursions and all sorts of things. So figure out what your source of anxiety is. And there's so many more anxieties. I could go on all day about the anxieties, but figure those out. And one of the really hard things that came out of that survey, we actually asked people, do you know how to solve the problems that the barriers that you are facing to starting home education? 7% of people said yes. Right? That's not many, right? That's 7% of people said that they could solve the barriers in front of them. So if you have barriers, if you have anxieties, join an online group, ask your questions in there. You'll have 50 people telling you, it's okay. This and this and this happens. And the biggest anxiety, how am I going to teach them because I'm not a teacher? Or how am I going to do this because I didn't finish school? Guess what? We're not teachers. We're not the sage on the stage. We're facilitators. So we see what our kids need and we provide it. And, whether it's finding a mentor, whether it's finding a book, whether it's finding a course, whether it's finding a group, whatever it is. And if we can't find it, if we don't know the answers, that's fine. We don't have to be a genius. We just ask. Ask the community because there'll always have been someone who's tread that path before you.
Thanks, Pavlina. Community really, for so many different reasons, is becoming, that support that many of us need on many different levels, including the home education realm as well. And thank you, for talking us through some of those, I guess, the bigger myths. All of them I've had conversations around with others, but also within our family too, because we're like, okay, let's nut this out. especially to begin with. And really, when I say to begin with, that was a good year or so that we were, back and forth and, really teasing apart all, many of what you just spoke about and more, and sort of seeing where we land or how we feel about it, but also, like you said, feel into what the anxiety is, like really
Mhm.
what is it, and then what is actually true, right?
Yeah.
And then in that process, really just out of nowhere for ourselves, we just started to look at what communities there were. And obviously we came across the Home Education Network. And from there, you know, so much support came through, in that it was, the information that came through from Hen was just very, confidence boosting. Like, oh, actually, I think we could do this, because just the way you spoke about some of those matters already in this podcast, like we're having the discussions in a different way, where we're moving away from fear-based discussions, like, oh, that's going to be a lot of work for you. And then you're like, oh, that's going to be a lot of work for me, so we're just sharing in that energy of more fear-based thinking, feeling, and then decision making. But as you've mentioned, communities, trying to find those communities, there are many of them. I was really surprised about how many different home education based communities there were. And I'm Victoria based, and I thought, maybe we wouldn't find a homeschool co-op. Yeah, we found two, just like that, with not really hard, not looking for them really, to greater, time. And so, the support is definitely out there. From a personal experience, it's definitely out there. There is so much support. It's just a matter of tapping into those communities. And I found that Hen was just that very first community to tap into, that I felt gave me the confidence to go, okay, with the resources, the many workshops that you guys have run and recorded and have within the Hen portal, like I started to then, or we started as a family to explore these various areas, and then collate, I guess, some of the support for us making certain decisions. More from a place of, like, yeah, I'd say love and not so much fear. Um,
Yes.
so
And ultimately that's what you want for your kids, right? You want to be parenting from love. You want to be parenting with collaboration. And, home ed's perfect for that, because you can give kids as much freedom as you're comfortable with. You can give the kids all the freedom, or you can give the kids a lot of freedom, or you can give the kids some freedom. And what a lot of people find is that as time goes on, they actually start to trust their children more. And we don't trust children as a society. We don't trust them to know themselves. We don't trust them to know what they need. We don't trust them to understand the world and to understand themselves. And we do them a disservice, because they're actually very good at knowing themselves, knowing what they need, and following their passions. And if we give them that freedom, they do amazing things with it.
children are so intuitive, and they really, what
Yeah.
I'm coming to learn real fast is that they do know a lot about themselves, and then sometimes that then becomes colored, being in different places and spaces, and that conditioning then sort of
Yeah.
dilutes that element of self and knowing oneself. And um, and this is where, home ed can really nurture that, each and every day. So yeah, it really is, for me, it was just very refreshing, I think, coming out of, mainstream schooling, to be able to um, provide that space, for my
Yes.
child.
Space and
Yeah.
time. And that's what they
Mm.
need, space and time, just to think, just to ponder, just to sit and marinate in their own, you know, personality and figure out what they love. Because a lot of kids, when they come out of school, they've been in there so long being told what to do, and they haven't had the headspace to even think about what they love, that it takes some time to rediscover that. And sometimes they rediscover old loves. We have 15-year-olds who've rediscovered their love of trains. We have 16-year-old girls who are like, you know what, it is actually okay to like ballerinas. It is okay to like My Little Pony. And just lean into that. there's nothing wrong with it. Just be an individual, be who you are, and out of that come all the other things, That's when you start to follow your passions, and that's where work comes from later on, and that's where, exploring life and everything that the world has to offer comes because, you have a sense of self.
Yeah, definitely. And we all have very much our own gifts to provide in service in this world. So, um,
Definitely.
giving our children that time and that space, as you mentioned, is just more important than ever, from,
Yeah,
my perspective. And when we're in too much of the do mode, we can't be in the be mode, right?
yeah,
We lose the being in it all because we're too busy doing. And we certainly experienced that again, and even away from mainstream school, that like even just seeing the children, how busy they are, and then they pretty much by the end of the day they're hitting the wall, right?
absolutely.
And then a lot of other things come out of that, and there isn't the room for anything else.
But
um
also, there's no room for family life. There's no room for family connection because they come home and then you have to be the police saying, do your homework. And that's not fair on parents and it's not fair on kids because you're disrupting that connection. You're actually compromising that relationship by making parents be the enforcers of that. And, we shouldn't, nobody has to make kids learn. Like, it's, as a home educator and as someone who's who sees the world through those lenses and that paradigm, it is nonsensical to me that we think that we have to make children learn and that we have to motivate them. They are intrinsically motivated to learn. And so to put us in a situation where we have to be the person telling them to do that, number one, what's that telling them about learning? What's that telling them about themselves as a learner? And what's that doing to our relationship with our kids? If you're having to compel, bribe, whatever, beg, then you're doing it the hard way. And stop and reassess and look at what the kid wants to do and let them lead. Let them lead. Let them make decisions. And if they want to sit and watch telly all day, every now and again, let them. Let them do it. They're going to get sick of it after a while. They're going to go, oh, I wonder what's outside. Or, oh, did you see that thing over there? Or, hey, I saw this thing on telly. Can we go see it at the blah, blah? You know, they're not, you're not going to break their brains by letting them do the things that they are passionate about and that they are interested in. My kids have very little time for, sitting mindlessly looking at things. They'd much rather be doing, exploring, inventing, trying things out, you know, doing all sorts of busy things. And, you know, they're just too curious. And if that kid is, and this is something we should probably talk about, if you have a kid who is stuck in front of the tech, there's a reason for that. And they are in burnout and they need that decompression time and they will come out of burnout, but burnout is massive and it takes time. And especially neurodivergent kids who are in burnout, it can take a long time. And kids can stay in burnout if we continue to remind them that they should be doing other things and if we keep heaping the expectations on. So we need to remove those demands for those kids who are only able to watch telly or who are only able to scroll on their phone. There's a reason for it. Don't punish them for it. Don't judge them for it. Let them be. They will come out of it. They will reconnect. And we see it a lot as long as they're safe.
Mhm. Thank you for mentioning burnout, because I'm wondering how how much of that is actually being discussed or being put down to other reasons why a child might be experiencing burnout or showing the signs and the symptoms of it, but yet it's being, labeled with other labels. Um,
Lazy,
yeah.
addicted. These are really harmful labels, you know? Like, I'm not convinced that tech addiction's a thing, honestly. I I actually, from what I have seen, it's actually about a person trying to process the world, finding safety in something that is predictable and can be controlled by them. It's about agency. It's about not being able to manage the world outside, which is so spiky and hurtful, and being able to retreat into something that is safe. And a lot of that is about safety. And you're right, we do put harmful labels on kids and on people instead of trying to understand the underlying processes like burnout and trauma recovery that are actually going on.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting uh, some of the activities a child might engage in that we might see as, it's less desirable, or they shouldn't be doing it, and especially when it comes to tech. But I really am very much appreciative that you have, brought in, I guess this idea of, yes, that's happening, but why is it happening? And then why the child's engaging in a given activity. What are they gaining from it? And maybe we can look at it more so from that perspective. Um, Rather than the very surface perspective that the child should not be engaging, and that's not going to make them feel any better, or
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
get us out of a particular situation any quicker. And perhaps collectively we can be very quick to again label or assume so much. um, yeah,
yeah.
so
We
that's an
do like to
interesting one.
label things.
Yeah, I guess us humans, right? Well, in society, everything is labeled
Yeah,
when you think about it. So that's an interesting area in and of itself, of all the labels that we also give to ourselves and others. And the whole world revolves around labels in some way, shape, or form. It's not to say that they're not bad, but sometimes those labels might be, given out quite quickly, because it might be the thing that seems, the best thing to do at a given time for given reasons. But
and the
it
labels
is
I'm
all
talking
about.
about, the labels I'm talking about are labels like lazy or labels like disengaged. Um, where a lot of the time we're locating the problem in the child instead of locating the problem in the environment. And that's a big problem. Kids aren't lazy. If they're avoiding something, there's a reason for it. And like you said, you need to look at the underlying reasons for things. You know, be a detective, figure it out. Ask the child. So often we just don't ask the child. We just don't. And you know, we can try to be a genius, and we can, even as gentle parents, we can make that mistake and forget to ask. We can try and tell. And one of my kids, when they were really little, they would have been about 2, 3, and we just moved house a couple of months before, and I found a toilet roll in the toilet one day, and I was like, that's weird. Like, that's never happened before. So I did the first thing, which is you just ignore it and hope it never happens again. So I did that. Came back the next day, another toilet roll in the toilet. And so at this point, I sat the kid down and I was like, I'd really rather you didn't do that. Third toilet roll, met the same watery demise. And so we had a bit of a conversation about, at 2, 3-year-old level about, wastage and trees and blah, it was recycled, but still, all the things. And at this point, I was clearly veering off my usual parenting path because normally I would have asked why, but I'd forgotten to ask why. I was just telling the child not to. And in a very nice way, but still, I was there, and the kid's like, toilet roll in the toilet. Finally, I was like, oh, hang on, Pav, you haven't asked this kid why. And I said, why is the toilet roll going in the toilet? And this kid said to me, because there's no tigers. I'm like, what? There's no tiger? And the kid says, yes, there's no tiger. I'm like, so there's no tiger, so the toilet roll's ending up in the toilet. Yes, says the child. I'm like, okay, so there's no tiger in here. In the room with the toilet in it. Yep, there's no tiger in the room with the toilet with it, so the toilet roll is ending up in the toilet. And this kid loved cats and loved, big cats and small cats and all sorts of things. I'm like, right, so if there was a tiger in here, there would be no more toilet rolls going in the toilet? Correct. Okay. So we had a look, we found a gorgeous picture of a tiger licking her cub on Google. We printed it out on A4, we laminated it, we punched holes in it, we hung it up on the toilet roll holder, and we never lost another toilet roll into the toilet. And we moved several times after that. And every time we moved, I put that little tiger up in the toilet, hanging on the toilet roll holder to remind me to ask why.
Oh,
So
I
there you
love
go.
that.
That's a story about the importance of asking why. And
Oh,
a 2 or 3-year-old can tell you why. It doesn't have to make sense, right? Why would a toilet roll belong in the toilet if there's no tiger in the bathroom? I would have thought not having a tiger in the bathroom would be a good thing, but apparently it's not. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it doesn't have to. And that's the pivotal point of home education. It doesn't have to make sense to me because at the end of the day, that child's education is not about me. That child's education is about that child. So ask why and follow what they want.
I love that. I think that's a great place for us to, wrap up. We've had such a great discussion, Pavlina. Of course, we could keep going on and on. If people are curious to learn more about home education, where's the best place to find you and HIN and any information you'd like to give on that front?
So we've got a website. Maybe you could share the link along with this video. Maybe. Yep. So we've got a website. It's got a lot of information on it. There's a lot of free stuff on it. There's a lot of free video talks. There's a a guide to school can't that we've just published. It's a little booklet that gives you a sort of a background. We've got a whole page on school can't. We've got lots of information on lots of other aspects of home education, videos on what it looks like for little kids, for teens, pathways into university and work. We've got lots and lots and lots of info on our website. And if you become a member, then you've got access to things like workshops, support groups, more information and more videos and webinars that we've hosted with some really awesome people from around the world this year. So there's heaps of info on there. Membership's $25 a year. So per family. Someone was like, is that per family or per person? I'm like, no, family. So yeah, we do have a lot of info on our website, and you're always welcome to get in touch. We've got a Facebook, what do you call it, main page, and we've got Facebook groups as well. If you're looking for a local group, we've got information on local groups on our website as well. So yeah, and you can always get in touch too. We've got a contact us page.
Yeah, thanks, Pavlina. The HEN website is absolutely amazing, and being a member myself, it is a super deal with what is contained within the website, the portal, all the resources, the amazing talks that HEN has organised with, different people and, working in different areas with regards to education and related matters. I certainly found them to be super beneficial and, just mind opening. So, yeah, it's an amazing community to be a part of. Now, HEN is Victorian based, but like you mentioned a little earlier, that actually you have members, community members all over Australia. Is that right,
So
Pavlina?
we started in Victoria. We're now a registered Australian body, so we're an Australian organisation. Yay! Um, so yeah, we do. We've got probably I think 60% of our members or something are from Victoria still, just because of that history. We started in 1980, so we had a long history of just being a small organisation serving Victoria, but gradually we've got members into from all around Australia. We have people from overseas attending our webinars and things. So yeah, we've got a really lovely group in New Zealand that's very supportive as well. So and we've got sister organisations around Australia, and I'd encourage anyone, for example, in Western Australia to join HEWA, so Home Education WA, Home Education Queensland in Queensland. There's lots and lots of people out there who are supportive and, very helpful. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to wrap up, what's currently lighting you up, Pavlina, or inspiring the work you are doing in this area
Oh,
of home ed? And are there any exciting projects or ideas you're exploring next? I know you've mentioned that you've now become like Australian wide, which is amazing.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Anything else?
We've always got so much on the go. There's always so many things happening, like excursions and camps and blah, 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 all sorts of things. Um, in fact, we've got some new committee members, and that's been really exciting. We've now got, I think, 21 or 22 committee members, and that's fabulous. So, we're in a constant state of flux. We're constantly growing and changing and, improving our processes. My personal goal is to have HEN be really self-sufficient and almost run itself so that the humans in HEN can actually do the connecting with other people, and so that we're not spending all our time, doing the busy menial tasks. And yeah, we can spend time supporting people. So
Such wonderful work you're doing, Pavlina. So, thank you so much for everything that you give to the home education community. And all the support. We've certainly experienced it from our end, yourself and the committee members and everything that's going on at HEN, really supportive. So a big thank you, even just personally from me. And
oh, thank
thank
you.
you for and thank you for giving your time today to talk us through,
Okay.
some of what you did. Yeah, really interesting. And I'm sure our community will find this, this talk and the information you've provided today really helpful and
I'm
interesting. So
glad to
thank
hear it.
you.
I should probably also mention we're all volunteers at HEN, so we don't have anything to sell. It's the main thing too. We're non-commercial, entirely non-commercial, so we have unbiased advice.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess it's a testament to the community that you've very much been nurturing at HEN. You're all there for the love of home education and sharing what that could be for various
Absolutely.
families all over Australia and worldwide. So thank you
Yeah.
again, Pavlina.
Thank you. Thanks so much.